Make yourself some tea. Seriously, pause the video and make some tea, because this will be a heartfelt conversation, and I want you to feel at home. Ready? Then let's get to it. The wind that swept down from the north was keen and cold, though spring had already touched the white city with warmth. From the high balcony of the citadel, King Elisar Telcontar, Aragorn, son of Arathorn, gazed beyond the silver towers of Minas Tirith toward the blue mists that veiled the mountains. The land was at peace, yet the wind carried a scent he had not felt for many years, the wild tang of the north, sharp as old memory. Below, the fountains whispered, and the evening bells of the city rang clear. But even their music could not quiet the unease that had begun to stir in the hearts of men who rode the northern borders. A messenger from Anúminas had come that morning, weary and pale, bearing tidings that troubled the king deeply. There were whispers of a voice in the wilderness, a power that spoke in the ruins of Gemilvar, an ancient hold of Arnor, long fallen into dust. That name, Gemilvar, stirred the echo of forgotten lore in Aragorn's heart. It had once been a stronghold of the Dunedain in the elder days, raised by the descendants of Elendil in the time when Arnor still stood proud and bright. But wars and weather had broken its stones, and in the end, the earth had swallowed its halls. Few now could even tell where it lay, yet the messenger's tale spoke of strange things, of beasts that obeyed a hidden master, of wandering men who claimed they had heard the voice of Gemilvar, calling them to a new kingdom. Aragorn turned from the balcony, his cloak stirring like the wings of a great bird. He went down through the halls of the citadel, past the guards who bowed as he passed, and into the council chamber where his companions awaited him. Legolas stood beside the long window, fair and bright-eyed as the dawn in Ithilien. Gimli, son of Glóin, sat upon a carved bench, his beard gleaming red in the torchlight. At the far end of the table stood a young man, clad in the grey and green of the northern Dunedain, Malbeth, nephew of Halbarad, who had fallen upon the Pelennor fields. When Aragorn entered, all rose. He spoke without preamble. "My friends," he said, "tidings have come from the north. There are rumors of unrest beyond Fornost. Men and beasts stirred to strange obedience, led by a voice that none have seen. The place is named Gemilvar." Gimli frowned. "I know not that name. But if there are beasts obeying unseen masters, I mistrust it already." Legolas nodded gravely. "There are songs among the elves of old ruins beneath the hills of Arnor, places that remember sorrow. Gemilvar may be such a place." Malbeth's eyes kindled. "My lord," he said, "I know the land of which they speak. My father rode near it once in the days before the war. He said the stones there whispered when the wind blew, as if the past had not wholly died. If there is danger in that place, it is our duty, the duty of the Dunedain, to uncover it." Aragorn studied the young man's face. There was fire in him, the same unyielding spirit that had burned in Halbarad. "You speak truly," the king said, "but I will not send others where I wouldn't go. The north is mine as much as Gondor, and I will see with my own eyes what shadow moves there." Gimli grunted. "Then you shall not go alone. If there is fighting to be done, you'll have my axe beside you." "And my bow," said Legolas, his voice soft but sure. "It seems the peace of the reign of Elisar must still be guarded by old friends." Aragorn smiled, though his eyes were shadowed with thought. "Then let it be so. We ride within the week." The next morning, word spread quietly through the citadel. The king would depart upon a northern errand, a journey not of war, but of watchfulness. Few knew its true purpose, and fewer still were permitted to accompany him. Before the dawn of the 7th day, the company set forth from Minas Tirith. The guards of the gate bowed low as the king passed, cloaked in grey, his standard furled. Only a small escort of rangers rode with him, 10 in all, and none bore banners or horns. They crossed the Pelennor in silence, the first light of morning gleaming on the fields that had once run red with battle. Beyond the Anduin, they turned north, following the ancient roads that wound through the vales of the misty mountains. The land changed as they rode, from the gentle green of Gondor to the wild heaths of Eriador, where wind and weather ruled unchallenged. Days passed, and the stars grew cold above them. One night, as they camped beside a still tarn under the shadow of Weathertop, Malbeth came to Aragorn's side. "My lord," he said softly, "do you think this voice we seek is of the enemy's making? Could such evil have lingered in the north?" Aragorn's gaze turned northward, where a pale mist lay over the hills. "Evil is not easily quenched," he said. "Though Sauron has fallen, the world is full of echoes. Some are faint and harmless, but others wait for willing hearts to awaken them again. The ruin of Gemilvar was born in pride and folly. It may be that such pride stirs once more." Malbeth bowed his head, but his eyes were bright with resolve. "Then we shall see it ended." Aragorn looked upon him kindly. "You remind me of one I rode beside in dark days. Be steadfast, Malbeth of the Dunedain, for the road ahead will test us all." The wind sighed over the hills, bearing with it a distant murmur, faint yet clear, a sound that might have been the call of a horn or the echo of a voice long forgotten. And in that moment, beneath the starlit sky of the north, the king knew their journey had truly begun. For many days the king and his companions journeyed northward, through lands that few men now trod. The hills grew higher and lonelier, their slopes cloaked in wind-bent heather and grey rock. The stars seemed sharper here, and the moon rode lower over the plains, as though watching their passage in silence. No banner flew above them, and the sound of their horses' hooves was muffled by moss and sodden earth. They crossed the weather hills, then turned westward, riding through the broken country that once had been the proud realm of Arna. But now the bones of that kingdom lay scattered beneath turf, and time. Crumbled towers rose like ghosts from the mist. Great stones, carved in ages past with the sigils of kings, now lay half buried in the soil, worn smooth by rain. Aragorn would often halt upon some height and look far into the distance, his keen eyes searching the horizon. He spoke little, but those who rode beside him could sense the burden upon his mind. For every ruin they passed was a memory of the kingdom he had sworn to renew. Yet even kings are not free from shadows of the past, and these hills whispered with the voices of 1,000 years. On the 8th day they reached the wide, empty plain called the Barrow Fens, where low mists clung to the ground and twisted trees rose from the marsh like fingers. Their horses snorted uneasily, for the air was heavy and cold. Here the rangers rode closer together, for few places in Eriador held darker repute. That night they camped upon a small rise above the mist. The stars were hidden, and the only light came from their fire, glowing red and low. Gimli sat sharpening his axe, muttering about the softness of northern stone. Legolas stood apart, gazing into the fog with eyes that could pierce the night. Malbeth sat beside the king, his cloak drawn tight. "The men of Fornost speak of this place with dread," he said. "They say voices rise from the fog, the voices of those who died when the Witch King came out of Angmar." "Do you believe it, my lord?" Aragorn poked at the embers, sending up a brief flare of sparks. "I believe the dead seldom lie wholly silent," he said, But these are not the voices we seek. Still, we shall pass swiftly through this place. Evil thrives where memory is strong." Malbeth nodded, though his gaze strayed to the shadows between the trees, and it was then that the first sound reached them, faint and distant, yet unlike the cry of any bird or beast. It was a note of music, low and trembling, as though a horn were being sounded deep beneath the earth. It rose and fell with the wind, fading to silence before any could mark its direction. The company froze, every man listening. Gimli spat into the fire. "That was no horn of war," he growled. It sounded more like a sigh from the grave. Legolas turned to Aragorn, his expression grave. "The wind carries strange tidings. That sound came not from east or west, but from below. It is near, yet far, as though the hills themselves were calling." Aragorn rose, his face pale in the dim firelight. "It is the voice they speak of," he said quietly. "Gemilvar is near." They set out at dawn. The fog had thickened, and the land fell away into gullies and ridges overgrown with thorn and creeping vine. Before noon, they reached a valley where an ancient road, half buried in moss, wound through the heather like a forgotten scar. "This way once led to Gemilvar," Malbeth murmured, tracing the worn stones with his gloved hand. "My grandsire told me it was a fair city, a fortress of white marble built upon 7 terraces, each crowned with towers. But fire and flood broke it in the time of Arvedui, and none returned." They followed the road downward, until at last the mist thinned and the ruins came into sight. The valley opened wide before them, a hollow of grey stone and shadow. The remains of walls jutted from the earth like broken teeth, and in their midst stood a black archway, still proud, though half swallowed by ivy. Beyond it lay the remnants of streets and the pale gleam of shattered marble. "Behold Gemilvar," said Aragorn softly, "the once bright city of the Dunedain." A chill ran through the company, for though no wind stirred, the air trembled faintly, and all felt as if unseen eyes watched them from the ruins. The horses stamped and tossed their heads, uneasy. Aragorn raised his hand. "We go on foot from here. Keep your weapons ready, but make no sound unless need demands it." They passed beneath the archway. Within, the silence was so deep that even the creak of leather sounded loud. The streets were lined with toppled pillars, and among them grew weeds of pale hue, glimmering faintly in the gloom. At the heart of the ruin stood a wide square, and in its center a great stone dais. Upon it rested a thing that glimmered like silver in the half-light, a horn, long and slender, bound with bands of blackened metal. Legolas drew a breath. "That is no common horn," he whispered. "Its making is ancient, Númenórean craft, from the days before the Shadow." Aragorn approached slowly, eyes fixed upon the relic. Upon its rim were words in the high tongue, worn but still legible. "Let him who sounds this horn command the hearts of men." Gimli frowned. A proud boast, and one that bodes ill. Malbeth's voice was hushed with awe. Then the tales were true. The horn of Vear, the voice of Gemilvar. Even as he spoke, a sound rose, a murmur from the stones themselves, faint as breath. The air quivered, and a whisper seemed to run through the ruins, though none could tell its tongue. The horn trembled where it lay, and a shadow passed across the square. Then a figure appeared upon the far side, tall, cloaked in grey, a man by shape but pale as death. His voice rang out clear and cold. "Who dares set foot in the realm of the Forgotten?" The company drew their weapons, but Aragorn stepped forward, his hand upon Andúril's hilt. "I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn. king of the reunited realm," he said. "These lands are under my rule and my watch. By what right do you claim them?" The figure laughed, a sound like stone cracking in frost. "Rule? There is no rule here, save the will of the strong. I am Carmagil, heir to the line of the north. Long have I dwelt in these ruins, and long have I heard the horns call. The days of kings are over. The days of voices have come." And before any could move, he lifted his hand, and the horn of Vear rose from the dais as if drawn by unseen power. The next moment it sounded. The blast shook the valley like thunder. The company staggered, their thoughts swam as if drawn into a dream. From the hills came cries, wild and terrible, and in the mist, dark shapes began to move. Aragorn's voice cut through the haze. "Hold fast! To me!" But the sound of the horn did not cease. It echoed through the ruins, rising and falling like a tide, and in every echo was the weight of command. For the voice of Gemilvar had awakened, and its first words were of war. The sound of the horn lingered like a storm that would not pass. Its echoes ran through stone and air alike, and the very earth beneath Gemilvar seemed to tremble with its command. The mists writhed as though alive, and shapes began to take form within them. Men, beasts, and things half between, all drawn toward the call that bound them. Aragorn's company stood their ground upon the cracked square, the red flare of torches wavering in the grey. Legolas notched an arrow to his bowstring, his keen eyes fixed upon the advancing shadows. Gimli hefted his axe, muttering a curse that steamed in the chill air. The rangers formed a half-circle around their king, blades drawn, faces grim and pale. Then the mists broke, and from them poured a host unlike any seen since the dark days of Angmar. Hillmen in ragged leathers, their eyes glassy with strange devotion, marched beside wolves with matted fur and slavering jaws. Among them moved taller figures, men of Númenórean blood, gaunt and wild-eyed, bearing the sigil of a black horn upon their tunics. At their head strode Carmagil, the horn of Vear clutched in both hands. His grey cloak billowed behind him like a shadow, and his voice rang through the ruin, deep and cold. "Bow before the voice of Gemilvar," he cried, "for the strength of the forgotten rises anew. I am heir to the north, the true son of its kings. You, who call yourself Elisar, have stolen my birthright, but now the earth itself speaks for me." Aragorn stepped forward, drawing Andúril. Its blade flared with a white fire that cut through the gloom. "No man's voice may claim what the hearts of free folk have won," he said. "Lay down that horn, Carmagil, and end this madness before it destroys you." The answer was a horn blast so fierce that the air itself seemed to shatter. Several rangers staggered, clutching at their heads. One dropped his sword and fell to his knees, whispering incoherently. Even Legolas wavered for an instant, though his will was strong. But Aragorn stood unmoved. His eyes were bright as steel, and his voice rose above the storm of sound. "Hold your minds, Dunedain of the North. The horn commands only the weak. Remember your oaths, and stand." His words struck like a clear bell amid the thunder, and the company steadied. Gimli roared and waded forward, axe flashing. Legolas's arrows flew swift and straight, felling the beasts that leapt through the fog. The rangers met the charging hillmen, blade for blade, their battle cries echoing off the stones. Aragorn moved like a flame through shadow, Andúril shining in his hand. Every stroke cut down an enemy, yet his eyes never left Carmagil. Between them, the horn of Vear gleamed, pulsing faintly with light, as if alive. At last, the two met upon the dais where the horn had first lain. The clamour of battle faded into a dull roar beyond them. Carmagil's face was white as marble, his eyes burning with pride and madness. "You are too late," he hissed. "The horn has awakened, and through it my will is bound to all who hear. I need no throne, no crown, only the voice that commands." Aragorn lifted his sword. "Then let the voice be silenced." Carmagil blew the horn once more, and the blast struck like a hammer. The stones cracked beneath their feet, and for a heartbeat the world itself seemed to bend. Yet Aragorn, recalling the songs of Elendil and the strength of the West, stepped through the storm and struck. Anduril's edge met the horn, and the clash rang out like lightning. Sparks flew, and both men were hurled apart. The horn of Vear fell from Carmagil's grasp, rolling across the dais. Its light dimmed, flickered, then flared brighter than before, as though in fury. The air thickened. Voices whispered in every tongue of men. Commands, pleas, curses, oaths. The horn was speaking, though not with one will but with many, all fighting for dominion. Carmagil crawled toward it, his hand outstretched. "Mine!" he gasped. "It is mine alone." But Malbeth sprang forward, seizing the horn before him. For an instant, his face was caught between terror and awe. The whispers filled his ears, tempting him with promises of power, of glory restored to the north. His fingers trembled upon the horn's rim. "Malbeth," Aragorn's voice cut through the chaos, "you are your father's son. Remember Halbarad's oath, that the hands of the Dunedain shall never be turned to pride." The young ranger's eyes met his king's. Then, with a cry that echoed through the ruins, he hurled the horn away. It struck the marble floor and split with a sound like thunder. Light burst from the crack, white and blinding. A great wind rushed through the valley, scattering mist and shadow alike. The hillmen fell to their knees, their eyes clearing as if waking from a dream. The beasts fled into the night, howling in fear. Carmagil screamed, a long, terrible cry that was drowned by the horn's final note. The relic shattered utterly, its pieces crumbling to dust that vanished upon the wind. When the brightness faded, only silence remained. Aragorn stood among the broken stones, his cloak whipping in the dying gale. Carmagil lay upon the dais, pale and still, the madness gone from his eyes. He looked up at the king with a faint smile. "I sought the voice that could command the world," he whispered. "But it was never mine, was it?" Aragorn knelt beside him. "No voice can rule what should be free," he said softly. "Your strength was great, Carmagil of the North, but your heart was lost to pride, as were many before you." Carmagil's gaze drifted to the stars now visible through the clearing mist. "Then let my name be forgotten, as the city is forgotten," he murmured, and his breath faded into silence. When dawn came, the valley of Gemilvar lay quiet. The mists were gone, and the ruins shone faintly in the pale light. The company buried Carmagil beside the broken dais, marking the place with a single stone. Malbeth stood beside his king. "He was of our blood," he said quietly. "A Dunedain, though fallen. It is a bitter thing to see our own brought low." Aragorn placed a hand on his shoulder. "Remember him, but do not grieve. His fate is a warning, that the strength of Númenor lies not in command, but in mercy." Legolas and Gimli joined them. "So ends the voice of Gemilvar," said the elf. "Yet the echo of such power lingers. You will have need of wisdom, King Elessar, to guard against it." Gimli nodded grimly. "Aye, and I say we leave these ruins to the earth. Stone remembers too much of sorrow." Aragorn looked upon the valley one last time. "Let Gemilvar rest," he said. "No banner shall rise here again, nor voice speak from its stones." the north shall heal in silence." They turned their horses and rode out beneath the waking sun. Behind them, the ruins lay still, and the wind that followed was gentle, carrying no sound but the whisper of grass. Yet far to the west, in the deep wilds of Eriador, there were some who claimed that, on certain nights when the moon was thin, a faint note of music could be heard drifting over the hills. The last sigh of the horn of Vear, fading forever into the long quiet of the north. The long road home wound southward through leagues of quiet wilderness. The company rode in silence, weary but unbowed, their hearts heavy with all they had seen. The shadow of Gemilvar lingered behind them like a fading storm, yet peace had not fully returned to their thoughts. For each man knew that evil seldom dies utterly. It slumbers, waiting for another voice to waken it. The days were fair at first. Spring had ripened in the north, and the fields that lay between the weather hills and Bree were alive with wild flowers. The sky was pale and open, the air filled with the song of larks. To a stranger it might have seemed a land untroubled, innocent of ruin. But the rangers of the north rode warily, for they knew that peace is a thing easily broken. Aragorn rode at the head of the company, his grey cloak stirring in the breeze. His face was thoughtful, yet his eyes were clear, as though he had set some quiet resolve within himself. Beside him rode Malbeth, who had said little since the breaking of the horn. His hand still bore the faint white marks where the relic's power had burned him, and at times he would touch them absently, as if feeling for a voice that was no longer there. Gimli rode a pace behind, his axe at his side, grumbling in his beard. "I have swung steel in many battles," he said once, "but never against such trickery. Give me foes of flesh and bone, not whispers and wind. A man should fight what he can see." Legolas smiled faintly. "And yet, my stout friend, it was your axe that held the line when the horn's thrall turned upon us. Your strength is not only of arm, but of heart. Few could have stood unshaken in such storm." The dwarf snorted. "Aye, well, perhaps my skull is too thick for voices to creep inside. I'll count that a gift." Aragorn glanced at them, a shadow of a smile on his lips. "Your gifts, both of you, have saved more than you know. But we are not yet done. The power that stirred in Gemilvar must have drawn its strength from somewhere. The horn was a tool, not a master. I would learn who forged it, and why its echo endured when so much of Númenor's craft has perished." Malbeth lifted his head. "My lord, the lore masters of Anúminas might know. There are old scrolls there, kept from the time of the northern kings." "Then that shall be our road," Aragorn said. "We will ride first to Bree, and from there send word to the stewards of Anúminas. If any fragment of truth remains, we will find it." They reached Bree after many days, and the sight of smoke rising from chimneys gladdened their hearts. The town lay quiet under the evening sky, its familiar lights shining through the trees. To the guards at the gate, Aragorn was but a travel-worn ranger, for he had laid aside the tokens of kingship, and thus they entered without fanfare. At the prancing pony they took lodging, and for the first time in many weeks they sat before a fire that was not kindled for war. Barliman Butterbur, older and rounder than in days gone by, bustled about them with his usual clatter and confusion, scarcely recognizing the tall stranger who asked after ale and bread. "Strangers from the north, eh?" he said, puffing. "Not much company comes that way these days, not since them queer noises started up again in the downs. Hounds won't go near, and some of the shepherds say they hear music at night. Sort of a sad tune, drifting on the wind. But it's probably just the breeze in the stones, I always say." Aragorn's hand stilled upon his cup. "Music, you say? "Oh, aye, a faint kind of calling. Some folk say it's ghosts, I say it's the weather," Butterbur went on cheerfully, not noticing the sudden stillness at the table. "Anyway, you'll find no ghosts in Bree, thank the stars. Only good ale and better beds." When he had gone, Gimli leaned closer. "So, the horn's song lingers still." Legolas nodded slowly. "No power is ever wholly spent. The wind bears memory, and memory can be as dangerous as any blade." Aragorn's gaze grew distant. "We must learn the truth swiftly. If the Horn of Vaer was not the first of its kind, others may yet lie hidden. And if any remnant of its voice remains, it must be bound in silence before it finds another will to serve." At dawn they left Bree and turned west. The green hills rolled away before them, quiet and fair. Yet beneath that calm, the king felt a stirring, faint as a heartbeat beneath stone. Sometimes the wind would shift, and he would hear a whisper like the echo of the horn, no louder than the sighing of leaves, but enough to make the hairs rise upon his neck. By the third night they reached the ruins of an old watchtower on the borders of Arnor. There they made camp, lighting no fire. The moon hung low and red, and the land lay hushed. Malbeth took the first watch, pacing the hilltop while the others slept. Hours passed, and the night deepened. Then, faintly, he heard it again, a note of music, soft as breath. It drifted over the plain, mournful and slow. He rose, gripping his sword, and peered into the darkness. There, among the stones below, stood a solitary figure. The man's face was pale in the moonlight, his garments tattered as though he had walked long in the wild. In his hand, he held a shard of something that gleamed faintly. When he lifted it to his lips, the same ghostly tone filled the air. Malbeth's blood ran cold. The fragment shone like silver, the same hue as the Horn of Vaer. "Who goes there?" he called. The figure did not answer. The note ceased, and the wind fell still. Then the man turned his head, and Malbeth saw that his eyes were empty, white as frost. He opened his mouth, and a whisper escaped, faint but clear. "The voice is not ended." The next moment, he was gone, vanished into the mist that rolled across the plain. Malbeth ran down the slope, but found nothing save a small shard of metal lying among the weeds. It was cold to the touch, and when he lifted it, a faint hum rose from within, as though the fragment remembered the song of the horn. When dawn came, he brought it to Aragorn. The king took it, studying the faint runes upon its side. "So the horn was not wholly destroyed," he said grimly. "Its spirit clings still, like smoke after flame." "What shall we do with it, sire?" Malbeth asked. Aragorn wrapped the shard in cloth. "We shall bear it to Rivendell. There the wise may know how to cleanse what remains. But we must take heed, for power such as this has a will of its own." He looked northward, where the horizon lay dim and far. "Gemilvar is fallen, yet its echo walks still. Until every voice of the shadow is silenced, our task is not done." The wind rose from the hills then, cool and wild, carrying with it the scent of rain, and far away, so faint that none could be sure it was not dream, came the sound of a single note, soft, sorrowful, and waiting to be answered. The companions turned their faces toward the west and rode on, their shadows long upon the grass, as the song of the past followed them into the gathering dusk. The road to Rivendell wound eastward, through deep valleys and across the ancient barrows of Eriador. The company rode by day, beneath the pale spring sun, and by night they camped beside streams that murmured like soft voices from the distant mountains. Yet peace did not come to their hearts, for the shard that Aragorn bore in his satchel seemed to thrum faintly with life, as though whispering to itself in dreams. No word was spoken of it, yet all felt its presence. Gimli muttered that he could hear a faint humming when the wind was still, though his companions heard nothing. Legolas watched it warily, sensing a power older than the craft of men. Malbeth, who had found it, rode often in silence, as if listening to something that only he could hear. On the third evening after they left Bree, they came to a glen where white birches grew thick beside a silver brook. The light of the setting sun glowed through the leaves, and for a time they rested. Aragorn sat apart upon a fallen log, turning the wrapped bundle in his hands. Legolas came to him quietly. "You are troubled, my friend," he said. "The shadow of Gemilvar has followed you farther than stone and ruin." Aragorn sighed. "Would that it were only shadow. This fragment holds more than memory. When I first touched it, I felt a will within it, faint but restless. The Horn of Vear was made in Númenor's last years, when pride had grown great among men. I fear it drew power not from the valor, but from darker sources." "Then why keep it?" asked the elf. "Cast it into the sea and let the waters claim it." Aragorn shook his head. "Evil left unstudied grows again in ignorance. We must understand its making if we would prevent its return. The lore of Rivendell may yet reveal how it bound the hearts of men." Legolas was silent for a while, gazing at the red light flickering through the trees. "You bear too many burdens, Aragorn," he said softly. "Even kings cannot heal every wound." "Perhaps not," Aragorn replied. "But we must try." They rode on. The weather turned foul, and grey rain swept down from the misty mountains. For 2 days they saw no sun, only the dim gleam of wet stone and dripping leaves. The rivers swelled, and the paths turned to mire. Yet they pressed forward, for the shard grew heavier in Aragorn's keeping, and at times a faint whisper seemed to escape its wrappings, a murmur too soft to understand, yet filled with longing. On the 5th night, they found shelter beneath the eaves of an old watchtower, long abandoned. The stones were cold and mossy, but the roof still held. Gimli built a small fire, its smoke curling toward the cracked ceiling. Malbeth sat nearest the flame, staring into the embers. "My lord," he said after a long silence, "when I held the horn in Gemilvar, it spoke to me. Not in words, but in thoughts. It promised to restore our people's glory, to rebuild the North as it once was. For a moment, I believed it. It was like hearing my father's voice again, calling me to rise." Aragorn looked up from the fire. "The horn knew your heart, Malbeth. It used your longing to bind you, but your strength broke its hold. Never doubt that." The young ranger shook his head. "If it could sway me so easily, what chance have others? There are still those in the wild who would follow any voice that promises power." Gimli grunted. "Then let them try their luck against your king's sword. Pride's a stubborn weed, but it cuts easily enough when faced with steel." Legolas glanced at the dark mouth of the tower. "Perhaps," he murmured. "But the roots of such weeds run deep." Before dawn, Aragorn awoke. The fire had long since burned to ash, and mist coiled through the gaps in the stone. All slept, save the wind. But then he heard it. Soft, distant, the faint sound of a horn blowing somewhere in the east. His hand went at once to the bundle beside him. The shard within it was trembling. He rose swiftly, unwrapping it. The fragment shone dimly in the gloom, casting a ghostly light on the walls. Faint words shimmered upon its edge, runes of Númenor long lost to common speech. They pulsed as if with a heartbeat. Aragorn whispered the ancient tongue, translating what he could. "Let the will of the king command forever." He felt the chill of understanding then. The Horn of Vear had been forged not as a weapon of war, but as a tool of rule, crafted by lords who sought to bind the hearts of men to obedience. Yet in their arrogance they had given it life, and that life had turned upon them. He wrapped the shard again and went outside. The rain had ceased, and a pale light showed on the eastern sky. He stood upon the hilltop and looked toward the mountains. Far off, beyond the mists, he thought he saw a flicker of gold, like the glint of dawn on metal. Then it was gone. Behind him, footsteps sounded. Malbeth had followed, his cloak drawn tight against the chill. "You heard it too," he said. Aragorn nodded. "The horn's echo carries still. Perhaps a remnant of its sound lingers in the land, as the cry of the Witch King haunted these hills for centuries. Do you think it calls to someone?" "I fear so," Aragorn said. "Power seldom dies without seeking a new voice." They reached Rivendell at last, weary but unbroken. The valley lay calm beneath the high peaks, its waterfalls gleaming like silver threads. It seemed untouched by the world's turmoil, yet even here the memory of darkness lingered faintly, as though the earth itself remembered. Elrond's sons, Elladan and Elrohir, greeted them at the bridge. Though much time had passed since their father departed over the sea, they still guarded the house of their kin with quiet strength. "Welcome, King Elessar," said Elladan, bowing. "You come with troubled purpose, I think." "I bring a remnant of peril," Aragorn answered. "The Horn of Vair is broken, yet its fragment endures. I would place it in the keeping of the wise." They led him within, to the great hall, where the air smelled of old wood and parchment. There the lore-masters of Rivendell gathered, for word of the king's coming had gone before him. Upon a white cloth, Aragorn laid the shard, unwrapped at last. It gleamed faintly, the runes flickering like dying embers. Elrohir bent close. "It still breathes," he murmured. "Strange that such a thing could live after its unmaking." A grey-bearded lore-master stepped forward. "In the elder days," he said, "the Númenóreans forged many wonders. But in the pride of their decline, they sought to master not only craft, but hearts. This horn was one such folly, a vessel of will, shaped to rule the minds of men. Its echo cannot be destroyed by breaking the shell. The spirit must be unbound." Aragorn looked at him sharply. "And how is that done?" The loremaster met his gaze gravely. "By the same means through which it was bound. By the will of a king. You must command it to rest, and mean it with all your heart." The king stood silent for a long time, then reached for the shard. It was cold as ice, and the whispers returned, faint but pleading. "We can rebuild, command, rule forever." He lifted it high, and his voice rang through the hall. "By the authority of Elessar, son of Arathorn, last of the kings of the Dunedain, I release you. Let no will command the free hearts of men again. Sleep now, and trouble this world no more." The light within the shard flared, then faded. The runes went dark. When the glow died, only dull metal remained. Elrohir smiled faintly. "It is done." Aragorn placed the fragment upon the table. "Then let it be sealed here forever, a memory of pride and its cost." He turned toward the open window. The evening air was sweet with the scent of the Bruinen's waters. Somewhere beyond the hills, a lark began to sing. For the first time in many days, Aragorn smiled. "The voice is silent," he said. "Let the north know peace again." Yet even as he spoke, far beyond Rivendell's quiet valley, a faint wind stirred the grass upon the hills of Gemilvar, and for a breath, so soft that none living heard it, the earth itself seemed to sigh. The days that followed in Rivendell were of rest and quiet thought. The air of that hidden valley was healing, and the weariness of long roads seemed to lift from the hearts of those who came within its borders. The waters of the Bruinen ran clear and swift, whispering against the stones as though they carried messages from ages long past. Yet though his body found ease, Aragorn's mind remained wakeful, for he sensed that their struggle had not wholly ended. Each morning, he walked alone in the gardens where the first roses of the season had begun to bloom. Often he would pause beside the small white tombs that lay beneath the willow trees, graves of those who had fallen in the wars of old. He thought of the Dunedain, who had guarded the north through dark centuries, and of those, like Carmagil, who had been led astray by pride and sorrow. The burden of kingship weighed upon him still, as though the very memory of the Horn of Vear had fastened itself to his heart. On the fourth day, while the sun lay pale upon the mountains, Malbeth came to him. The young ranger's face was troubled, though his voice was steady. "My lord," he said, "I cannot rest. At night I hear whispers, faint but clear. They call my name, though softly, as if from a distance. I fear it may be the echo of the horn." Aragorn studied him long. "You are not alone in hearing such things," he said. "Power such as that leaves marks upon all who have stood near it. But tell me, what do these voices say?" "They bid me return," Malbeth whispered. "They speak of duty, of a kingdom awaiting to be raised from the dust. Sometimes I almost believe them. It is as though my blood remembers the command of the horn." "The blood of Númenor runs deep," said Aragorn, laying a hand upon his shoulder, "and with it comes both pride and longing. You must guard your heart, Malbeth, as you would your sword. The call of Gemilvar is a false echo. What was once noble there was corrupted long ago." Malbeth bowed his head, though his eyes still held unease. "If the shadow has passed, why does it still whisper?" "Because memory is its root," the king replied, "and memory cannot be slain. It must be redeemed. Perhaps before this road is ended, that redemption will come." That evening, the companions gathered in the Hall of Fire. There the lore masters and minstrels of Rivendell had lit many candles, and their glow flickered upon the carved pillars like soft gold. Music filled the hall, low songs of ancient Númenor, and lays of the First Age sung in the elven tongue. The sound was clear and beautiful, yet beneath its beauty lay sadness, as though each note remembered the loss of the West. When the music faded, one of the lore masters rose. His name was Meneldir, and he was grey of hair, though sharp of mind. He addressed the king respectfully. "My lord Elessar, we have read the records of our fathers, and in them lies a tale that touches your quest. The Horn of Vear was not the only relic forged in that age of pride. It was one of 7 instruments wrought by the Lord of Armenelos, who sought to bind the loyalty of his people through enchantment. Of these, only 2 were ever completed, the horn and the mirror of Saurindil. The mirror was said to reflect not the face, but the desire of the beholder." Gimli grunted, rubbing his beard. "A fine pair of toys for a fool with too much time." Meneldir inclined his head. "Aye, Master Dwarf, and their making hastened the ruin of Númenor. Yet some writings hint that fragments of the mirror were borne east before the fall, hidden by the faithful. None know where they lie." Aragorn's brow darkened. If even one of those relics endures, then danger still walks the world. Evil speaks not only through horns or blades, but through the hunger of hearts. Legolas looked toward the tall windows, where moonlight streamed in silver bars. "Perhaps the whisper that haunts your young ranger is not only the echo of sound, but the memory of sight. Something unseen still watches the north." Malbeth's hand clenched upon his knee. Then let me go, my lord. Let me return to Gemilvar, and see with my own eyes whether it stirs again." Aragorn rose, his voice firm. "No, you will not return alone. If there is truly another relic of that age abroad in the world, then its uncovering is my burden, not yours. We shall ride together once more." 2 mornings later they departed from Rivendell. Elladan and Elrohir rode with them as far as the ford of Bruinen, and there took leave, blessing their road. The company turned north again, retracing their path through the wild. Spring was deepening, and the grass upon the hills shone bright beneath the sun, yet all felt the nearness of unseen things. Birds flew strangely silent, and the wind carried a faint tone that was neither breeze nor voice, but something between. On the 5th night, they camped near the mounds of Tirn Gorthad, the Barrow Downs. It was a place of dread, though the darkness that once haunted it had long been banished. The moon rose full, and its light fell upon the green ridges like pale snow. Gimli slept with his axe at his side. Legolas kept watch beneath a beech tree. Malbeth lay wakeful, his mind troubled. And when the hour before dawn came, he heard it again, a whisper rising from the ground itself. He stood, trembling, and followed the sound toward one of the barrows. The air grew colder, and a faint mist coiled about the stones. Upon the mound's crest lay a flat slab of grey rock, worn with runes half faded by time, and upon that slab glimmered something small, a piece of polished glass, no larger than a man's palm. Malbeth knelt and lifted it. At once the mist thickened, and within the glass a faint image stirred. He saw a city of white towers gleaming beneath a golden sun, banners of the Dunedain streaming in the wind. Then the vision darkened, and he saw himself standing upon a high dais, a crown upon his brow, and before him thousands of men bowed in silence. The voice came then, soft and alluring. "Take up the crown, son of Holberad. The line of kings grows weak. A new voice must rise." Malbeth's breath caught. He knew it was false, yet the image was bright, and the longing in his heart answered it. "Malbeth!" Aragorn's voice broke through the haze. The king had come swiftly, sensing peril. He strode forward, Andúril gleaming. "Drop it!" For a heartbeat, Malbeth hesitated. Then, with a cry, he hurled the shard away. It struck the stone and shattered, spilling light across the barrow like molten silver. The mist vanished. When Aragorn reached him, the young man was pale and trembling. "It was the mirror," he said hoarsely, "or what remains of it." Aragorn knelt, gathering the fragments. Each one held a faint shimmer, as though reflecting distant stars. "So Meneldir's tale was true," he murmured. "The relics of Númenor still haunt the world." Legolas and Gimli joined them. "A mirror that shows a man his desire," said the elf. "A dangerous gift indeed." "Accursed one," Gimli growled. "No good comes from looking too long at your own pride." Aragorn wrapped the shards in cloth. "We will take these 2 to Rivendell, and seal them beside the horn's fragment. Let this place rest undisturbed." He looked to Malbeth, whose eyes were still shadowed. "You have faced the temptation of kings, and overcome it. Be at peace, my friend." Malbeth bowed his head. "If peace will have me." The first light of dawn touched the hills then, turning the grass to silver. The company rode on as the sun climbed higher, leaving the barrows behind. But as they passed out of that ancient land, the wind rose softly from the west, carrying with it a faint strain of music, like the sound of water upon stone, sorrowful and wise. And though none spoke of it, each knew that the songs of Númenor were not yet ended, nor all their echoes stilled. The wind from the sea was in their faces, as they turned westward once more, toward the wild shores where the old kingdoms of men had first arisen. Their road led them beyond Bree and past the green lands of the Shire, where smoke curled softly from the hill dwellings and laughter echoed faint across the meadows. Yet the king and his company did not tarry, for though the land seemed fair, their purpose was grave, and their hearts were burdened by what they had seen. They rode through the long days of late spring. The flowers of the heaths gave way to tall grass, and the scent of the ocean began to drift faintly upon the breeze. Aragorn often rode ahead, his eyes searching the horizon, while Legolas walked lightly through the fields beside him, listening to the song of the wind. Gimli followed close, grumbling about the endless miles and the softness of northern paths, though his axe never left his hand. Malbeth, once more quiet and thoughtful, rode at the king's left hand, his mind turned inward. At last, they came to the hills above Forlindon, where the remnants of the elven havens lay hidden among the cliffs. Few now dwelt there, for most of the fair folk had sailed long ago into the west. Yet some lingered, guardians of the sea gates, keeping watch over the fading world. Smoke rose from no hearths, and the only sound was the crying of gulls. As they descended the stony path toward the shore, Aragorn saw before him the wide expanse of the sea. It lay calm under the setting sun, a plain of gold and crimson light, stretching without end. He halted upon a ridge, and for a moment said nothing. Legolas turned to him. "This is the sea you spoke of," he said softly. "Even in the woodlands of Ithilien, I have heard its voice in dreams. Now that I stand before it, I understand the sorrow that haunts your kind." Aragorn nodded slowly. "It is a sorrow and a hope both, for beyond that horizon lies the place our fathers came from, and the place they can never return. Númenor is no more, yet its memory lingers like the scent of salt on the wind." Gimli looked out across the water and frowned. "A fair sight, though it makes me uneasy. Too much open space, and nothing solid beneath it. Give me the deep roots of stone any day." A faint smile touched the king's lips, but his gaze soon darkened again. "We come not for beauty, my friends, but for truth. Somewhere upon this coast, before the downfall, the faithful of Númenor built their last refuge. It is said they brought hither many relics of their craft. If the horn and mirror were both fashioned in that age, we may find the key to their undoing here." Malbeth's eyes gleamed with wonder. "Then we ride toward the first shores of the west." "Aye," said Aragorn, "and perhaps toward the last." They camped that night near the mouth of an ancient river. The stars shone bright, mirrored in the dark water, and the murmur of the waves rose and fell like breathing. Malbeth sat beside the fire, his gaze fixed on the flame. "Do you believe, my lord," he asked quietly, "that the sea still remembers Númenor?" Aragorn stirred the embers with a stick. "The sea remembers all things. It bears the bones of kings and the wreckage of their pride. But it also keeps what was good, songs, oaths, the sound of laughter. Its memory is wide as the world." He lifted his head then, for the wind had changed. Far out upon the waves came a sound faint as an echo, the call of a horn, long and low. The company rose at once. Gimli growled, "Another cursed horn! Will the ghosts of your ancient kingdom never tire of blowing them?" Aragorn's eyes narrowed. "That is no echo of Gemilvar. The tone is older, clearer. It is a call of the Sea Lords, long before their fall." Legolas turned toward the water. "There is light upon the tide," he said. "See, it moves toward the shore." They watched as a pale radiance drifted nearer, like the glow of a lantern beneath the waves. Then, breaking the surface, came the prow of a ship. small and white, its sails torn, yet it glided without oar or wind. No man stood upon its deck. It drifted soundlessly to the sand and came to rest as if guided by unseen hands. The companions approached warily. The vessel's timbers gleamed faintly, and upon its prow was carved the likeness of a winged crown, the ancient sigil of Numenor. Within the hull lay a single chest, bound with silver bands and sealed with wax. Aragorn knelt beside it. The seal bore the same runes he had seen upon the horn's rim. He broke it carefully, and within found a small casket of crystal, clear as ice. Resting inside was a ring of wrought gold, set with a stone of pale green. "The ring of Valandil," Aragorn whispered. "The heirloom of my house, thought lost when the North Kingdom fell." "How came it here?" Legolas's eyes widened. Perhaps the ship itself bore it from the deep, by will of those who once sailed west. Gimli crossed his arms. Or perhaps something less kindly sent it, hoping to snare another fool with bright treasure. Before Aragorn could answer, a chill wind rose, and a voice drifted over the waves, low and sorrowful, like the sighing of the tide. "Return what was taken. The sea remembers." They turned, but no shape was seen upon the shore. Only the ship lay before them, its sails whispering, though no wind stirred them. Then, from the casket, light began to shine, the stone in the ring glowing with soft fire. Aragorn lifted it, and the light grew brighter until it bathed them all in green radiance. For an instant, he saw within the flame the face of a tall man, proud and stern, wearing the crown of the Sea Kings. Then the vision vanished, and darkness fell. Gimli let out a low whistle. I liked that no better than the horn. Aragorn stood still, the ring in his hand. "It is no cursed thing," he said slowly. "This was wrought by the faithful, not the fallen. Yet it carries a warning. We have awakened memories that were meant to sleep." Legolas laid a hand on his shoulder. "Then what will you do with it?" "I will bear it to Annúminas," said the king. "There it shall rest beside the crown of Elendil. The sea has returned it, perhaps to remind us of what was lost, and what must never be repeated." They left the shore at dawn. The ghostly ship remained behind, half drowned upon the sands, and as the tide rose, it slipped once more beneath the waves, leaving no mark of its passing. The road back led them through green valleys, where the sea's song faded behind them, though the sound of it lingered faintly in the wind. Malbeth rode beside his king, his face bright with new purpose. "My lord," he said, "it seems the sea itself has chosen you as its messenger." Aragorn smiled faintly. "Not me, perhaps, but our people. Númenor's pride brought ruin, yet its hope endures. So long as we remember both, the world may yet find peace." And as they rode eastward, the morning sun rose over the hills of Eriador, setting the world aflame with gold. Behind them, upon the far horizon, the sea shimmered like molten silver, vast, eternal, and full of memories. Though none looked back, all felt its gaze upon them, as if the ocean itself watched the sons of Númenor returning home. Summer came softly to the north, and the fields of Arnor lay golden beneath the sun. The long journey from the western coasts had passed without peril, and yet a restlessness followed the company, like a faint shadow that no light could wholly banish. For though they had left the sea behind, its voice still lingered in their hearts, calling faintly from beyond sight. They rode now upon the ancient road that led toward Annúminas, the city of the kings rebuilt upon the shores of Lake Evendim. The waters of the lake shone clear and blue, and the white towers of the city gleamed upon the far bank like spears of light. It was a fair sight, and even Gimli was moved to admiration. "A strong place," the dwarf said, gazing up at the battlements. "Well built, though too many windows for my taste. You'd never find such gaps in a dwarven hall." Legolas smiled. Windows let the sunlight in. Even stone must learn to breathe. "Bah," Gimli grumbled. "I'd rather breathe mountain air than sunlight." But there was warmth in his tone, for he had come to love these lands, despite himself. Aragorn led the way through the gates, where guards of the Dunedain bowed low. Word of the king's coming had reached the city before him, and the streets were lined with folk, rangers and townsmen, women and children, who hailed him with cries of joy. Yet though he returned their greetings kindly, Aragorn's eyes were thoughtful, for he bore upon his hand the ring of Valandil, newly found from the sea, and its weight was heavy with memory. They came at last to the citadel upon the hill, where the Hall of Kings overlooked the water. Within, the air was cool and still. There Aragorn placed the ring upon a stand beside the ancient crown of Elendil, and for a moment the two relics shone together, gold and silver, sea and sky, bound in one light. "Thus are the past and the present joined," the king said quietly. "The sea has returned what was lost. May it rest here in peace." But even as he spoke, a chill passed through the hall, and the torches flickered. A sound like the faint sigh of waves stirred in the silence. The men nearest the doors looked about uneasily, and Legolas's keen eyes turned toward the western windows, where the light dimmed, though no cloud crossed the sun. Aragorn frowned. "The sea's voice follows too close," he murmured. "It is not in its nature to dwell so far inland." Malbeth stepped forward. "Perhaps the sea seeks more than peace, my lord. It may have sent the ring for a purpose, yet unfulfilled." Before Aragorn could answer, a cry rang from the courtyard below. The companions hastened to the balcony and looked down. There upon the steps stood a rider, his cloak drenched with water, though the day was dry. His horse trembled as though from long flight, and his eyes were wide with terror. He called up to them, his voice hoarse. "A storm rises from the west. It comes not from the sky, but from the ground. The lakes are trembling, and the river runs backward to the sea." At those words, Aragorn's face hardened. "Summon the guards. Legolas, Gimli with me. Malbeth, stay and keep the city calm." They rode swiftly to the lake's edge. The air was strange and heavy, tasting of salt, though the sea lay many leagues away. The surface of the water was rippling, though no wind stirred it. Then, from the depths, a faint light began to shine, a green glow, pulsing like a heartbeat. "It is the same light as the ring," said Legolas, his voice low. "The sea's memory stirs." Aragorn dismounted and stepped to the water's edge. "Show yourself," he said. "You have followed me far. What do you seek?" For a long moment there was only silence. Then the water rose. A shape formed within it, a figure of shimmering foam and light, tall as a man, yet unearthly. The voice that came forth was deep and mournful, like the breaking of waves on a distant shore. "Aragorn Elessar, son of Arathorn," it said, "heir of Elendil. You have found the ring of Valandil, but with it you have awakened that which was bound. The will of the sea remembers its own." Aragorn stood unflinching. "If I have done wrong, I would set it right. Speak plainly. What is it that you desire?" "The relics of Númenor were made with pride," said the voice. "Their power was drawn not from the Valar, but from the strength of the sea itself, the living will that endures beyond time. Long have I slept beneath the waves, dreaming of the White Isle, but the horn's cry reached me, and I awoke. The sea does not forget its children, nor its grief." Legolas bowed his head. "Then you are the spirit of the waters, the memory of Númenor made voice." The figure turned its gaze upon him, and the waters whispered, "I am no king, no god. I am the witness of their fall. When the proud sought to master all things, they drowned, and I bore them into silence. Yet now their airs stir again, and I am restless." Aragorn took a step forward, the hem of his cloak touching the waves. "I am heir to their blood, but not to their pride. We rebuild in humility, not domination. If the sea bears grief for what was lost, let us bear it with you. We will not repeat the folly of the fathers." For a long time the spirit was still, then the light softened, and its voice grew quiet. "You speak as one who understands, but take heed. Pride is not slain in a single generation. Guard your people well, son of the West, for even the sea's calm hides the power to destroy." The waters sank back into stillness. The light faded, and the ripples stilled. Only the faint scent of salt lingered in the air. Gimli exhaled, shaking his head. "I liked that no better than ghosts, but I suppose it meant no harm." Legolas looked to Aragorn. "It seems your kin are watched, even from the deeps." Aragorn turned to the lake one last time. "Then let them watch. If they seek remembrance, they shall have it, not in pride, but in wisdom." When they returned to the citadel, the air was clear once more, and the fear had passed from the hearts of the people. Aragorn ordered that the ring of Valandil be placed within the House of Law, sealed beneath glass and stone, never again to be worn by mortal hand. Over it he spoke a single command: rest. That night, as stars burned bright above the towers of Annúminas, the king stood upon the balcony and looked west. The wind carried a faint murmur, half wave, half song. He did not know whether it came from the lake or from the unseen shores of the sea. Malbeth joined him quietly. "The sea spoke truth, my lord. Pride is never wholly slain." Aragorn smiled faintly. "Nor hope. They are twins of the same heart." He laid his hand upon the railing, gazing toward the dark horizon. "Let the sea remember Númenor. Let us remember mercy. And so long as I reign, may the voice of Gemilvar and all voices of pride be silent." Far below, the waters of Ivandim shimmered in the moonlight, calm and deep. And though no horn was heard again, some said that, when the wind was right, a faint music still drifted across the lake, a song without words, the last lament of the sea for the kingdom that had sunk beneath its waves. Autumn descended upon the north, cloaking the lands of Arnor in gold and scarlet. The wind carried the scent of fallen leaves and distant rain, and the nights grew long and cool. Peace lay over Annúminas, like a soft mantle. And yet, beneath that peace, unease stirred once more, quiet as a whisper behind closed doors. For strange dreams began to visit the people of the city, dreams of the sea rising and of voices calling from beneath the waves. At first, none dared speak of it, for the king had commanded silence about such matters. But whispers have their own power. Soon even the soldiers upon the walls told tales of seeing pale lights moving upon the lake at night, and of hearing music faint as the sigh of wind through reeds. Some said it was the spirit of the sea come again to bless the ring it had once surrendered. Others feared it was a summons, a calling back to the deep. Aragorn listened in silence when word of these murmurs reached him. He neither denied nor confirmed them, though his eyes grew grave. "Dreams are not always lies," he said at last, "but their meaning belongs to those who shape them, not to those who hear them." Yet in the quiet of his chambers, even the king slept uneasily. In his dreams, he walked along the shores of Númenor as they had been in their glory, white towers rising from green hills, the sea shining bright under the sun. But each time the tide would rise higher, and he would hear the sound of a horn far off, calling through the roar of the waves. Then the light would dim, and he would wake, his heart heavy as stone. Legolas and Gimli still dwelt with him in Anúminas, the one tending to the new gardens beside the lake, the other overseeing the rebuilding of the city's gates. They saw the change in him, though they spoke of it seldom. One evening, as the last rays of sunset kindled the western sky, Legolas found Aragorn upon the high terrace overlooking the water. The king stood unmoving, his cloak stirring in the breeze. "You are troubled again," said the elf softly. "The light fades, but your eyes do not follow the stars. They search the depths." Aragorn sighed. "The sea's voice will not be stilled, Legolas. It calls to me in dream and waking alike. I fear that in sealing the ring, I didn't end its song. I only bound it within stone, where it gathers strength unseen." "Then perhaps it seeks not to harm, but to be heard," said Legolas. "The past cannot be buried beneath rock. It waits to be understood." Aragorn turned to him. "And if understanding wakes it again? The folly of Númenor was not ignorance, but pride, the belief that all could be known and mastered. I would not walk that road again." The elf smiled faintly. "You are not as they were. Your rule is not built on mastery, but on faith. Listen then, not as a conqueror, but as one who remembers." Before the king could reply, a horn sounded, not from Dream, but from the northern hills beyond the city. Its note was clear and urgent, carrying the call of alarm. Aragorn's hand went at once to Andúril. "To horse!" he commanded. They rode out at once, Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, and Malbeth, with a dozen rangers at their side. The night deepened as they climbed the slopes beyond the city, and the wind grew cold. From afar they saw torches flickering upon the ridges and heard cries carried faintly through the dark. At last they reached the watchtower upon the northern hill. There they found the guards uneasy, pointing toward the valley below. "My lord," one said breathlessly, "lights move upon the plain. Many lights, as of men bearing lanterns, though none approach the road." Aragorn stepped to the parapet. Far below, a pattern of gleaming lights wound across the dark plain. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, gliding silently in long lines. They flickered and dimmed, then glowed again, like the reflection of stars upon black water. Gimli gripped his axe. "Ghosts again, I'll wager. Will this cursed land never rest?" But Malbeth shook his head. "No ghosts, my lord. Those are men." Aragorn's eyes narrowed. "Men?" "Aye," said the ranger. "Hillmen from the north. They carry torches carved with horns. I know their kind. They were followers of Carmagil." A grim silence fell. "Then the shadow of Gemilvar has not died," said Legolas. "Some remnant stirs." Aragorn drew a deep breath. "We ride at dawn. If these men seek to rekindle what was broken, we must stop them before their madness spreads." Morning came pale and cold. The company rode swiftly north, following the tracks that led into the wild hills beyond Fornost. The trail was clear, for many feet had passed that way, trampling the heather flat. Around midday they came upon a valley, narrow and steep, filled with stones that glimmered faintly with frost. At its heart stood a circle of tall pillars, worn by time. From behind the rocks came movement, figures cloaked in grey and black, their faces half hidden. They bore banners marked with the sigil of a horn, and before them stood a man, tall and dark-haired, with eyes burning like coals. "I am Hathor, son of Carmagil," he cried. "Who comes to defy the voice of the north?" Aragorn rode forward, his cloak of green and silver flowing behind him. "I am Aragorn Elessar. king of the reunited realm. Your father's folly has already brought ruin upon these lands. Lay down your arms and return to peace, or face judgment." Hathor laughed, and his followers echoed the sound, harsh and wild. "Peace? There is no peace for those forgotten by kings. You rule from shining towers, while the sons of Arnor starve in the wastes. The horn called to us, and we answered. The voice of Gemilvar will rise again." At his signal, the hillmen raised their torches, and their chant filled the air, a deep, rhythmic cry that seemed to shake the stones themselves. "Gemilvar! Gemilvar! The voice returns!" The sound was strange, almost musical, and beneath it came another tone, low and steady. The ground trembled, and the pillars began to glow with faint green light. Legolas drew his bow. "They have found something," he said. "Something bound in the earth." Aragorn's heart sank. Then the relics were not the end. The horn's echo lives still beneath these hills. He drew Andúril, its light flashing like fire. "To me, Dúnedain!" he cried. The battle was swift and fierce. The hillmen fought like wolves, driven by fervor rather than skill. Yet against the trained blades of the rangers and the might of the king, their line broke. Gimli's axe rose and fell, cleaving torches and weapons alike. Legolas's arrows flew straight and sure. Malbeth faced Hathor himself, and the clash of their blades rang through the valley like thunder. But as steel met steel, the pillars' glow brightened. From the ground came a rumble, and a crack split the stone at the circle's center. A column of pale light burst upward, and a voice echoed, a sound neither male nor female, but vast, as if the earth itself spoke. The voice of Gemilvar does not die. It waits in stone and shadow, in the hearts of those who remember. The combat ceased. Even the hillmen fell silent, staring in awe. Aragorn stepped forward, his sword raised. "Then hear me," he said, his voice ringing clear. "You are not the master of men. The time of command and pride is over. By the blood of Elendil, I bind you to silence." He struck the ground with Andúril, and the flame of its edge leapt into the fissure. The light of the pillars shattered, bursting into a storm of sparks that rose and faded into the air. The voice cried once, long and bitter, then was gone. When the smoke cleared, the valley lay still. The hillmen fled, throwing down their banners. Hathor lay upon the ground, wounded but alive, his eyes dazed and empty. Aragorn lowered his sword. "The voice is ended," he said, "not by death, but by truth. The world will no longer heed such pride." Legolas nodded. "Then may the north at last find rest." As they rode back toward Annúminas, the wind swept gently over the hills, and for the first time in many months, there was only silence, clean and pure, like the sound of peace being born. And though the lake still shimmered with memory, no horn answered from the west, nor did the sea call. The voice of Gemilvar was gone, and the king of the north rode home beneath a sky washed clear of shadows. The snows came early that year, veiling the hills of Arnor in white silence. The fires of battle had faded, and peace once more returned to the north, though it was a peace hard-won and fragile as glass. The remnants of Hathor's following scattered to the wild lands beyond the weather hills, and the people of Annúminas spoke softly of the king's victory. Yet in their voices lingered awe, for all who had seen the light break over the valley of the pillars knew that something far older than men had been stilled that day. Winter's breath crept through the streets of the lake city, frosting the stones with crystal and making music of the ice-bound fountains. Within the citadel, the halls were warm and bright with firelight, and the king's household gathered often in the great hall, where songs of peace and remembrance were sung. There was laughter again in those chambers, and for a time the burden of years seemed lifted from the hearts of all. Yet even amidst that gladness, Aragorn remained watchful. He would rise before dawn and walk the high terraces, gazing westward over the frozen waters of Evendim. Often he stood there alone, the wind tugging at his cloak, his breath rising in pale mist. Those who saw him said that he seemed to listen to something far off, beyond the reach of mortal hearing. Legolas found him thus one morning, when the first light of day was spreading across the snow. "Still you seek the sea's voice," the elf said softly. Aragorn smiled faintly. "Aye. It has been silent since the breaking of Gemilvar, yet I cannot shake the sense that it watches still. The sea forgets nothing, and neither do I." "Perhaps it does not watch," said Legolas. "Perhaps it waits. All things that endure, water, stone, the stars, know patience. Even grief sleeps in time." "Then may it rest," said the king, though his eyes lingered on the horizon. "Too many voices have risen and fallen in the name of pride. I would have silence for a while." That winter passed quietly, and when spring returned, the land awoke, renewed. Green shoots broke through the thawing earth, and the sound of birds filled the woods once more. The rivers, swollen with meltwater, sang with bright laughter, and men set forth to till the fields that had lain idle through the years of strife. The north was healing. Messengers came from Gondor bearing tidings of peace from the southern realm, and in their words was gladness. Yet one morning, a rider arrived from the far east of Eriador, bringing news that darkened the king's brow. "My lord," said the messenger, kneeling, "strange lights have been seen near the ruins of Amun-Sul. Travelers speak of voices calling through the night and of figures moving upon the hill. Some say it is the wind. Others swear it is the work of sorcery." Gimli growled, his hands tightening on the haft of his axe. "More cursed stones. I'll warrant the earth of this land is riddled with them. Shall we dig forever to put your ancestors to rest?" Aragorn's gaze was distant. "Perhaps not ancestors, Gimli, but something that remembers them. The shadow of Numenor runs deep." Malbeth, who stood nearby, spoke hesitantly. "If the voice has found another place to speak, my lord, we cannot ignore it. The folk of the east will look to Annúminas for aid." Aragorn nodded. "Then aid they shall have. We ride at dawn." The road to Amon-Sul wound through rolling heaths and barren ridges where the wind never slept. The weather grew harsher as they climbed, and the clouds hung low, dark with rain. When at last they reached the hill, twilight had fallen, and the ruins of the old watchtower loomed against the stormy sky like the bones of a forgotten age. Lightning flared over the plains, and for an instant the company saw the ancient stones clearly. Broken pillars half buried in moss, their surfaces carved with faint runes. The wind howled through them, making a sound like distant chanting. Gimli spat. "I like this place not at all. Even the air tastes of ghosts." Legolas raised a hand. "Hush, there is something moving beyond the stones." Shapes emerged from the gloom, men clad in rough cloaks, their eyes hollow with weariness. They bore no weapons but staffs of wood, and their leader, a tall man with hair silvered by age, stepped forward and bowed. "My lord," he said, "we are wanderers of the north. We came seeking shelter upon this hill, but strange things have walked here since the snows melted. At night we hear singing, faint but clear, and the stones shine as though with moonlight. Some among us swear they see a figure standing at the summit, cloaked in white." Aragorn regarded him closely. "You have done wisely to keep away. This place has long been a watchtower of old Arna, and the spirits of its fallen may yet linger. We will keep vigil here tonight." The wanderers bowed low and withdrew down the slope. The king and his companions made camp within the circle of ruins. No fire was lit, for the wind was fierce and restless. They ate little and spoke less. As night deepened, the singing began. It was faint, drifting through the rain like mist. The melody was sorrowful, yet not unkind, a lament for something lost beyond recall. Aragorn rose, Anduril gleaming in his hand. "That song," he murmured. "I have heard it before." Legolas nodded, his eyes far away. "It is the song of the Sea Kings, the same that echoed in the valley of Gemilvar, before the horn awoke." They climbed the crumbling steps to the summit. There, upon the highest stone, stood a tall figure, robed in white, its face hidden by shadow. In one hand, it held a staff of pale crystal, glowing with soft light. "Who stands upon Amon Sul?" Aragorn called. The figure turned, and its voice carried like the wind. "A guardian of memory. You have bound the voice of Gemilvar, yet the echo lingers. All that was made by pride endures until it is forgiven." "Forgiven," the king repeated. "Aye," said the figure. "The sea remembers wrath, but it also remembers mercy. You cannot silence memory with stone alone, Elessar. You must heal it." The light upon the staff brightened, and in that glow Aragorn saw visions. The drowned isle of Númenor beneath the waves, its towers gleaming through the deep, the faithful who fled in sorrow, and the long march of his people through shadow and exile. He bowed his head. "Then teach me," he said. "How may memory be healed?" "By remembrance without pride," the voice replied. "By honoring what was, yet seeking not to claim it again. Rule not as a master of the past, but as a servant of the future." With that, the light dimmed, and the figure faded into the rain, leaving only the staff upon the stone. Aragorn reached out and took it. The crystal was cool beneath his hand, and a gentle warmth spread through his heart, easing a weight he had not known he carried. When dawn came, the hill was still. The storm had passed, and the sun rose over the plains, turning the wet stones to gold. Legolas laid a hand upon the king's shoulder. "The sea has spoken once more," he said. Aragorn nodded. "Not to warn, but to forgive. The voice of Gemilvar is truly ended, its echo at last turned to peace." They descended the hill together, and as they rode southward, the wind blew soft through the grass, carrying with it no song of sorrow, but a quiet harmony, like the breath of the world renewed. And though the ruins of Amon Sul stood silent behind them, those who wandered the north in later years said that on calm nights, when the stars shone upon the hills, a faint light could still be seen atop the tower, gentle, unwavering, and filled with grace. Summer ripened once more over the north, and for a time the land seemed healed of all its former wounds. The fields of Arnor stretched golden beneath a clear sky, and the waters of Lake Evendim glimmered with the quiet peace of morning. Farmers sang in the meadows, children played beside the shore, and traders came once again along the northern roads to Anúminas, where the white banners of the king fluttered above the towers. The tale of the voice of Gemilvar had already become legend, spoken of in low tones by firelight. Some called it a shadow of the past, now laid to rest. Others whispered that it was the sea itself that had tested the king's heart and found him steadfast. Whatever truth lay behind the telling, peace endured. Yet Aragorn, Elessar, though his rule was wise and his kingdom whole, could not wholly forget. Often he rode beyond the city's walls, traveling alone or with only a few companions. Sometimes he went north among the hills where the Dúnedain still kept their lonely watch. Sometimes he turned south toward the Shire, though he did not cross its borders, respecting the quiet folk who wished no king. More often he rode west, toward the sea, as if the waves still whispered to him in dreams. It was upon such a journey, in the late days of harvest, that the king came again to the western coast, with Legolas and Gimli at his side and a small company of rangers. The land here was rugged and wild, strewn with the ruins of old havens where the ships of Númenor had once anchored in ages past. Few now dwelt there, save the fisherfolk who lived among the cliffs, and even they shunned certain coves where strange lights were said to gleam beneath the water. They reached one such cove at sunset, where the cliffs curved inward to form a narrow bay. The sea lay calm, its surface reflecting the crimson sky. Broken quays of ancient stone jutted into the water, overgrown with moss and seagrass. Among them stood the remains of a tower, its base half swallowed by the tide. "This was Elena's haven," said Aragorn quietly. "In the elder days it was the last port of the faithful before they sailed into exile. From here Elendil himself departed, bearing the seed of our people." Gimli peered up at the crumbling walls. A noble ruin, though it's taken more beating than any dwarven craft could endure. The sea is a patient foe. Legolas gazed toward the horizon, where the first stars were kindling. "Yet even ruin can be fair," he said. "The sea takes, but it also gives. Perhaps it is not foe, but mirror." They made camp upon the strand. The waves murmured softly, and the night was still save for the crackle of their fire. After a time, one of the rangers, Bregor, a man of sharp eyes and quiet speech, approached the king. "My lord," he said, "while gathering driftwood, I found something cast up by the tide." He held forth a fragment of metal, curved and dull with salt, yet faintly gleaming in the firelight. Aragorn took it, his brow furrowing. "This is no common wreck," he said. "See the markings. These are of Númenorian make." Gimli frowned. "More relics of your forefathers? If they keep washing ashore, perhaps the sea means to build a museum." Aragorn smiled faintly. "Or a warning." He turned the fragment over in his hands. It bore a single line of inscription, nearly worn away. "From the deep we rise." As he spoke the words aloud, the sea stirred, though no wind blew. The waves drew back from the shore with a long hiss, and then returned with a single, heavy surge that drenched the stones. In the distance, a pale glow flickered beneath the surface, moving like a lantern beneath the deep. Legolas's hand went to his bow. "Something wakes," he said. Aragorn rose, casting the metal aside. "No weapon," he said softly. "Not yet. Let us see what answers." The glow came nearer, spreading into a circle of light that shimmered upon the waves. From within it rose a shape, neither ship nor creature, but a great disk of silver stone, smooth as glass. It floated upon the water, humming faintly, and upon its surface were runes that gleamed like moonlight. "The seal of Númenor," Aragorn murmured. "I have seen its likeness in the scrolls of Rivendell. It was said to guard the last vault of Elena's haven." Gimli's eyes narrowed. "A vault? Then treasures lie beneath, no doubt. Though knowing your people's habit, they're more likely curses than gold." The king stepped forward, the surf washing about his boots. "Treasure or curse, it must not be left for chance. The sea has chosen to give this up. We will go down and see what waits below." He ordered torches bound in pitch and sealed against the tide. When all was ready, they waded into the shallows and climbed upon the floating disk. The moment their feet touched its surface, it began to sink. Not swiftly, but gently, as though the water welcomed them. The light deepened around them, changing from silver to green, and then they were beneath the sea. Through the clear depths, They saw pillars of white stone rising from the ocean floor, an entire hall preserved beneath the waves. Fish glimmered among the arches, and weeds waved like banners in a silent current. At the center stood a great door of bronze, unmarked by rust. Upon it was carved a single emblem, a crown above a horn. "The mark of Vear," Aragorn whispered. "Here lies the resting place of those who forged the horn itself." The door opened soundlessly at his touch. Beyond lay a chamber, vast and round, lit by the faint glow of crystals set into the ceiling. There were statues of kings and lords long dead, their faces proud and stern. And upon an altar of black stone rested a single object, a crystal sphere, clear as water, yet filled with swirling light. Legolas drew a sharp breath. "It is beautiful," he said. Aragorn approached. "It is a seeing stone," he murmured. "One of the lost Palantari of the north. Not all were found after the fall." Gimli grunted. "Aye, and most that were found brought naught but trouble. Leave it lie, I say." But the king shook his head. "No, the sea has shown it for a reason. Perhaps it seeks not to tempt, but to remind." He laid his hand upon the sphere. At once the light within flared, and images leapt before his eyes: the downfall of Númenor, the flight of Elendil, the long wars of the north. Then the vision changed. He saw himself standing upon the shores of Gemilvar, the horn shattered at his feet, and behind him a vast figure of light rising from the sea, its eyes filled not with wrath, but with sorrow. Then the light faded, and all was still. When he looked up, his companions waited in silence. "What did you see?" asked Legolas. "The sea's memory," said Aragorn softly. "It does not seek vengeance, only remembrance. The power that once drowned kings now yearns for peace. But peace must be earned." He turned to the sphere and placed it back upon the altar. "Let it rest. The age of such wonders is past. We are their heirs, not their masters." They returned to the surface as dawn broke over the sea. The disk rose slowly and came to rest upon the tide, bearing them back to the shore. When they stepped once more upon the sand, it sank beneath the waves and vanished from sight, leaving only a faint circle of foam behind. Gimli looked out over the water and nodded. "Aye, let the sea keep its secrets. The world is quieter without them." Aragorn smiled, his gaze upon the rising sun. "The sea will always speak, Gimli. But now, at last, I understand its tongue." They turned their horses eastward, the light of morning shining upon their faces. Behind them, the sea rolled softly against the cliffs, its endless voice no longer a summons, but a song, a hymn of memory and renewal. And thus ended the last quest of the king in the north, and the final echo of Númenor's pride was carried away upon the tide, leaving only peace where once there had been voices. Years passed like leaves upon the wind. The north grew strong again under the rule of King Elisar, and the name of Arnor was spoken with reverence among men. Towns rose where once there had been ruin, and fields bloomed upon lands long barren. The roads were safe. The watchfires of the Dunedain burned no more upon the lonely hills, and peace, long exiled from the world, at last made its dwelling in the north. Yet peace is a strange companion. It brings rest to weary hands, but it also leaves room for thought, and thought in the hearts of kings is seldom still. So it was with Aragorn. Though his reign was long and wise, his heart often turned westward, to the sea, whose murmur he had not heard in many years. In quiet hours, when his court lay sleeping and the fires burned low, he would walk alone upon the walls of Anúminas and gaze toward that far horizon. It was said among his people that the king could hear what others couldn't. The sound of waves breaking upon unseen shores and voices singing beyond the edge of hearing. He never spoke of it openly, but sometimes, when the wind came from the west, those standing near him would see his eyes grow distant and full of light, as if they reflected not the stars above, but the memory of another world. In the 31st year of his reign, tidings came from the North Downs. A group of wanderers, seeking shelter from a storm, had found a cavern newly opened by rain and time. Within, they had discovered carvings older than any known, wrought with the signs of Numenor and the 7 stars of the west. Among the carvings was a single word, chiseled deep and clear: Gemilvar. When this was told to Aragorn, he sat long in silence. At last he rose and said, "If the earth remembers, then so must I. The name still calls." Legolas and Gimli were summoned once more, for they still lingered often in the north, the elf tending to the green woods of Ithilien, and the dwarf aiding in the stonework of the king's new halls. Malbeth too came from among the rangers, now grey at the temples, but steadfast as ever. Together they rode north, following the wind that carried the scent of the sea even across leagues of grass and mountain. The journey took many days. They passed through wild lands, where the ruins of the old kingdoms slept beneath moss and ivy. The world felt older there, as if each step trod upon the breath of forgotten ages. One night, as they camped beside a stream, Malbeth spoke softly. "My lord, do you believe the name Gemilvar will ever be truly forgotten?" Aragorn looked into the flames. "Forgotten? No, nor should it be. Memory is not the enemy of peace. We are who we are because of what we remember. But remembrance without pride, that is the test. Numenor fell because its people forgot humility." Gimli nodded. "Aye, and dwarves too. Pride builds fine halls, but it breaks them just as easily." Legolas smiled faintly. "And yet from ruin grows beauty again. The earth heals if given time." The king's eyes lifted to the stars. "Then perhaps the north, too, has healed enough to tell its last tale." They found the cavern at dawn, hidden among the slopes of a barren ridge. Its mouth was narrow, veiled by bramble and thorn, but within it widened into a vast chamber where stone gleamed with veins of silver. The air was still and cool, carrying a faint sound like distant water. Upon the walls were carvings, lines of ships and waves, of towers crowned with stars, and there, at the far end, stood a single stoned table, its surface smooth as glass. On it lay a book. It was ancient beyond reckoning, bound in leather that had turned black with age, yet the pages within were dry and whole. Upon the first page was written in graceful script, "The Chronicles of Gemilvar." Aragorn lifted the book with reverence. The ink within shimmered faintly, as if alive. The words were written in the high tongue of Numenor, yet he could read them as though they had been set down yesterday. They spoke of the founding of Gemilvar, of a city built not for power, but for remembrance, raised by those who fled the sea's wrath, to honor what had been lost. Yet as the pages turned, the tale darkened, pride grew, and the horn was made to command the hearts of men. The final entry was brief and sorrowful. "We have called upon the sea, and it has answered. The voice that was meant to bless now binds. The king has fallen to madness, and the waves rise once more. May those who come after us learn that no command endures but that of mercy." When Aragorn finished reading, silence filled the cavern. "So that was their end," said Malbeth softly. "They sought to remember and became prisoners of their own remembrance." The king closed the book and laid it back upon the stone. "Not all remembrance is a chain. We have read their last words. Now we will honor them." He drew Andúril, and its light filled the cavern. Then he spoke in the tongue of Númenor, his voice low and solemn. "By the mercy you forgot, I set you free. Sleep in peace, people of Gemilvar. Let your memory become song, not sorrow." The air trembled. A faint sound rose around them, like the sigh of wind through distant halls or the murmur of a tide retreating from the shore. The carvings upon the wall seemed to glow for a moment, then faded into stillness. Legolas bowed his head. "It is done." Gimli let out a slow breath. "And may it stay done. I've had my fill of voices in stones." Aragorn smiled faintly. "No voice remains now, Gimli, only silence. But not an empty silence, a healing one." They left the cavern and rode south again. The weather turned mild, and the land seemed brighter, as if the very air had been lifted of some unseen weight. When they reached the high road once more, they paused upon a ridge overlooking the plains. From that height they could see the shimmer of Lake Evendim far to the south, and beyond it the faint line of the sea itself, glinting like molten silver beneath the sun. Aragorn reined in his horse and looked long upon that horizon. "The sea and the land," he said softly, "once at war, now at peace. So ends the last echo of Númenor's pride." Malbeth bowed his head. "And so begins the age of remembrance." Legolas turned his gaze eastward toward Ithilien. "The world will not soon forget what you have done, my friend. You have taught even the sea to forgive." Gimli chuckled. "And if the sea can forgive, there's hope yet for elves and dwarves." Aragorn laughed then, a clear sound that carried on the wind. "Then let that be our song," he said. "Hope beyond memory, peace beyond pride." They rode on together, their shadows long upon the grass. Behind them, the hills of the north lay quiet, their stories ended at last. Yet far off, where the land met the sea, a single gull rose into the sky and wheeled eastward, crying a note both mournful and glad. And those who heard it said that the sound was like a voice calling farewell, a voice no longer of command, but of blessing. Thus was the north made whole again, and the name of Gemilvar, once a word of dread, became instead a tale of mercy, carried softly on the wind for generations to come. The days of Elisar's reign flowed onward like a wide and gentle river. The lands of the north, once scarred by long years of shadow, now gleamed with life and promise. Where ruins had stood, towers rose again. Where the wild had claimed dominion, fields and orchards spread beneath the sun. In Anúminas, the bells rang often, not in warning but in celebration, and the laughter of children echoed in streets that had once known only silence. Yet even in peace, the shadow of the past did not wholly fade. The king was loved by his people, but those who served him closely knew that he carried still the weight of old memories, the echo of the sea, the fall of Númenor, the voice that had once sought to command the hearts of men. Though the horn of Vear was gone, and the halls of Gemilvar silent, remembrance could not be banished so easily from a line that had seen both glory and ruin. It was in the 44th year of his rule that a strange thing came to pass. Messengers arrived from the western marches, bearing tidings of unease. Along the coast near Forlond, fishermen spoke of seeing lights upon the horizon, green and white, moving as though beneath the waves. Nets cast into those waters came back torn, and on one morning a small boat was found adrift, its hull untouched but its oars gone, as if carried away by unseen hands. When the king heard these tidings, he rose at once. "The sea stirs again," he said. "I must see it with mine own eyes." Though his counselors urged caution, he would not be dissuaded. He took with him only a small company: Malbeth, now grey but still unyielding; Gimli, whose beard had grown long as iron; and Legolas, fair and unchanged, as though time itself feared to touch him. Together they rode westward across the wide plains, beneath skies heavy with the scent of rain. The journey was long, yet the land was gentle, and the people greeted them with joy. They crossed green meadows where herds grazed in peace, and through small towns that had risen anew from the ruin of centuries past. When at last they reached the western coast, the wind was strong and filled with the cry of gulls. The sea lay before them, vast and glimmering beneath a pale sun. The king dismounted and stood upon the cliff, his cloak billowing behind him. "The same sea," he murmured, "that bore our fathers to this land and swallowed the pride of Númenor, ever faithful, ever merciless." Gimli grunted. "It looks no different to me. A fine thing to gaze upon from a safe height, but I'd not trust what lies beneath." Legolas's eyes were bright as he looked westward. "It is fair beyond all telling," he said softly. "Even in its sorrow, it sings." Malbeth, standing a little apart, pointed toward the water. "Look there, my lord." Far below, where the waves broke against the rocks, a light shimmered, faint but steady, green as the heart of an emerald. It pulsed in rhythm with the tide, as though breathing. "The same hue that shone in the horn and the mirror," said Aragorn. "The sea's memory returns." They descended by a narrow path to the shore. The tide was high, and the waves crashed around them, throwing up sprays of foam that glittered in the sunlight. At the water's edge, half buried in sand, they found a stone unlike any other, smooth, rounded, and marked with runes in the high tongue of Númenor. Aragorn brushed away the sand and read aloud, "Here lies the gift of the West, to be sought only by those who remember mercy." Before any could speak, the sea surged higher, and the stone split with a sound like thunder. From within it poured light, bright and pure, rising in a column that reached toward the heavens. The company fell back, shielding their eyes. The light grew, took shape, and then settled into a form that stood upon the sand. A woman, tall and robed in flowing white, her hair like silver water. Her eyes shone with the reflection of the sea. Legolas bowed low, for he perceived that she was no mortal. "Lady of the Sea," he whispered. The figure spoke, her voice like the murmur of the tide. "Long have I watched the race of men, children of the West, and long have I grieved for their pride. But in you, Elessar, I see at last the healing of that wound. You have ruled not as master, but as steward, and through mercy you have stilled the voice that sought dominion. For this, the sea is at peace." Aragorn bowed his head. "If peace has truly come, then let it remain. The hearts of men are frail, and we are ever tempted by remembrance. Teach us to forget what should not be remembered." The lady smiled faintly. "Forgetfulness is no gift, son of Arathorn. Memory is the root of wisdom, and even sorrow bears fruit in time. But know this, the sea will trouble your people no more. Its voice is silenced, save in song." She lifted her hand, and a single tear fell from her eye to the sand. Where it struck, the ground shone with light, and a small flower sprang forth, a bloom of silver and pale green, its petals trembling like foam. "This," said the lady, "is the flower of the sea. It shall grow only where hearts are humble and remembrance is pure. When it fades, know that the sea's peace falters." Then she turned toward the waves. "The time of the great voices is ended. Rule well, Elessar, and let the world remember mercy." She stepped into the surf and was gone. The light faded, and the sea returned to its calm rhythm, whispering against the shore. For a long time none spoke. The flower gleamed faintly beside them, its fragrance sweet and strange. Gimli was the first to find his voice. "Well, there's an end to your restless sea at last. I'll not mourn it. I've had enough talk of water to last an age." Legolas laughed softly. "Yet even stone is shaped by the sea, old friend. Perhaps we too are shaped by its memory." Aragorn knelt and touched the flower. "Mercy," he said. "That is what the sea has taught us, after all its wrath." He rose, and the wind caught his hair like a banner. "Come," he said. "Let us return home. The sea has spoken its last, and I would hear, instead, the voices of my people." When they came again to Annúminas, the city shone bright beneath the summer sun. Word of the king's return spread swiftly, and the people gathered to greet him. That night, as music filled the halls and the torches blazed upon the walls, Aragorn took the flower of the sea and planted it in the courtyard beside the Fountain of the Kings. Its silver petals opened beneath the starlight, and the water mirrored its glow. In the days that followed, the flower never withered, and the winds that swept from the west were mild and sweet. Mariners who sailed the northern coast spoke of calm seas and skies, untroubled by storm. And though the tales of Gemilvar and the Horn of Vear were still told in song, they were no longer songs of fear, but of peace hard won and pride redeemed. As for the king, he grew old with grace, and when he looked westward, it was no longer with longing, but with gratitude. The sea's voice had taught him what all kings must learn, that to rule is not to command, but to remember. And so the years passed in quiet splendor. When at last the flower's light faded, many generations later, men said it was not a sign of sorrow, but of fulfillment. For the sea no longer needed to speak. The hearts of men had learned at last to listen. The final years of King Elisar's reign were gentle and golden, as though the very world itself sought to repay him for the burdens he had borne. Under his rule, the north and south stood united. Peace filled the lands of men, and the names of war and shadow grew distant, belonging to an age fading into song. The great cities of Gondor gleamed white beneath the sun, and Annúminas, his seat in the north, shone again with the splendor of its ancient kings. The flower of the sea still bloomed beside the fountain in the king's court. Its silver petals caught both moon and starlight, and the water mirrored its glow. It became a symbol of the realm's peace, and the people of Arnor would come from far and wide to look upon it. They called it Erniloth, the ocean blossom, and said it was the sea's last gift to men, a living promise that memory and mercy could dwell together in harmony. Many winters came and went. The king's hair turned grey, though his eyes remained bright, as when he had first taken the crown. Legolas often came from Ithilien with tidings of the south, and Gimli from the glittering caves with gifts of stone and silver. Malbeth, though long past the years of his strength, still served as warden of the north and was beloved by all. The realm prospered, and children grew who knew not fear, but only stories of courage. Yet even in peace, time could not be stilled. And when the last spring of Elisar's life came, he felt the weight of his years and the quiet call of the west stirring in his heart. The gulls that circled over Lake Evendim cried often, and their voices filled him with a strange, sweet melancholy. He knew that his road was drawing to its end. One evening, as the sun sank over the hills, he called for his dearest friends. Legolas and Gimli came to him, and Malbeth also, though slow of step. The four sat together in the gardens where the flower of the sea grew, and the king spoke softly. "My friends," he said, "the years have been kind, but I feel them now. The sea no longer calls to me in restlessness, but in peace. I would not leave this world without seeing its last light from the shores I first beheld." Legolas bowed his head. "Then you shall not go alone," he said. "I will walk beside you, even to the edge of the world." Gimli grumbled, his voice thick. "And I'll be there too, though I've no love of your seas. Someone must make sure you don't go floating off into legend without proper company." A smile touched Aragorn's lips. "Then my heart is lightened. We shall go together once more, as in the days of old." A few days later, they departed Anúminas quietly at dawn. The people lined the streets to watch them pass, and though none spoke it aloud, all knew they looked upon their king for the last time. He rode at their head, tall and calm, his grey cloak bound with silver. The sun rose behind him, turning his hair to fire. Their road led westward, through lands now green and full of life. Villages bloomed where once had been ruin, and men and women came forth from their homes to bow as the king passed. Yet he did not tarry, for the sea awaited him. They came again to the coast, where years before the Lady of the Sea had appeared. The cliffs stood unchanged, the air filled with salt and wind. But now the waters were calm, and the evening light lay upon them like molten gold. Aragorn dismounted and stood upon the sand. His gaze stretched far across the waves, and for a long while none spoke. At last he said, "Long ago I feared this sea, for it spoke of loss. Then I learned to hear its song of mercy. Now I hear in it the promise of rest. The voice of Gemilvar is stilled forever, and the pride of Númenor redeemed. Yet even peace must find its ending." Legolas stepped forward. "The sea is not an ending, Aragorn. It is only another road." The king smiled. "So said your people long ago. Perhaps it is true, for I feel now as though I stand not before a shore, but before a gate, one that opens toward a country I have long remembered in dreams." He looked upon his friends and clasped their hands in turn. "You have shared my road since the first days of my wandering. Whatever lies beyond, it cannot be fairer than the fellowship we have known." "Then this is not farewell," said Gimli gruffly. "Only another tale waiting to be told." Aragorn nodded, his eyes bright. "Aye, another tale." As twilight deepened, the king walked alone to the water's edge. The waves lapped softly at his feet, and the gulls wheeled high above. The wind was warm, carrying with it a scent of far places, of white shores and unending peace. He knelt and laid his hand upon the sea. "Once you bore the wrath of my people," he said quietly. "Now you bear their forgiveness. Sleep well, old friend." Then he turned and looked east, toward the lands he had loved and ruled. "Keep watch, my people," he murmured. "Guard the mercy that has been won. Let no pride awaken again, while my memory endures." The light of the setting sun bathed him in gold, and for a moment he seemed a figure wrought of flame and shadow, both king and wanderer, both man and myth. And then, as the last rays touched the horizon, he bowed his head. Legolas and Gimli came to him, but they found him still and peaceful, a faint smile upon his face. The sea sighed softly beside him, as if whispering a lullaby to a child. They buried him there, upon the western shore, beneath a cairn of white stones. Upon it they set a single bloom from the flower of the sea, which did not wither, though the salt winds blew. And above his resting place they carved these words in the tongue of Númenor: "Here lies Aragorn Elessar, the restorer of the north and south, who stilled the voice of Gemilvar and made peace between land and sea. Years passed into centuries, and kings followed kings, but the memory of Elessar never faded. Mariners sailing the western coasts would sometimes speak of a light seen far out upon the water, shining like a single star upon the waves. Some said it was the spirit of the king, keeping watch over the realm he had healed. Others said it was the sea itself, remembering its truest friend. And in the gardens of Anuminas, the flower of the sea still bloomed, even when all other blossoms slept. Children born in later ages would look upon its silver petals and ask their elders why it shone so brightly. Then their elders would answer, "Because once there was a king who listened to the voice of the sea and taught it to sing of peace." Thus ended the tale of Aragorn, Elessar tel Contar, the voice of Gemilvar, the healer of the West. And though his body lay beneath stone, his spirit walked forever where waves meet sky, where the pride of the world was humbled, and where memory and mercy became one.
Історія завершена. Але, як казав сам Гімлі, це лише чергова оповідь, що чекає свого часу. Цей текст для мене про дружбу, яка витримує випробування часом, і про те, як важливо вміти відпускати. Арагорн, Леголас, Гімлі – вони стали для нас як сім'я. І бачити їх у часи миру, коли вони долають привидів минулого не мечем, а своєю мудрістю – це щось особливе. Якщо історія торкнулася вашого серця, підтримуйте відео лайком. Це найкраща нагорода. Так що, дякую за перегляд, бережіть себе, пам'ятайте, навіть найтемніша ніч закінчується світлом.